Well, hey YouTube, I hope you're not in the position of your computer shutting itself off. If that's the case, you may very well may find yourself taking it apart to assess, is it packed with dust? Is there an obvious quick reason that you could clean up and hopefully let that heat out of the box like it's supposed to? If the thing gets crammed full of dust, it's going to overheat. Okay, now the other thing is this thermal paste can fail. Some guys will tell you the thermal paste doesn't fail, and they're on a 3-year-old machine. This machine is dated 2007. We're in 2020. The thermal paste failed. Okay, so we went through the process of replacing the thermal paste on the main CPU and also on the video card. What we found in the video card was air channels that were blocked with debris and dust. So regardless of the capacitors that have failed on the motherboard, which is what we found, there was 5 bad caps. Now it's still working. We have the thing running for a half hour and then it shut itself down. So she rebooted and she's up on it now. We're going to try to deal with this until we realize, you know what, it's shutting itself off. And we have a replacement motherboard that's new in the box. So at that point we would kind of remove all the cables from the motherboard, take the motherboard out of the chassis, remove the chip, and it's a block of aluminum with a fan on it, so you pull that off of there, and then go ahead and start the process of installing the new motherboard. Put the chip in, put the cooler block of aluminum with the fan, plug that in, plug in all the rest of the cables, box it up, and then there you go. Now that's not to say, well, it's an MSI K9N. It's the same type of motherboard that we have in there that failed from bad capacitors. And this was China was making, me play joke, me put bad capacitor in your Coke. So all of this stuff's failed, and it'll fail again because they're bad. They just don't last very long, and then the top bulges up. If you look at a capacitor, it's flat, and there's they cut like a cross in the top of it as a relief. So when it blows, it'll just puff up, and you can see, oh, that domed one, that's a failed capacitor, and then you replace it. So we're familiar with this because my wife knows about bad caps, and we know we've done 4 or 5 motherboards that we've put capacitors in. Oftentimes I'll be in there working, I'm going to go clean it out and replace the thermal paste, and my wife will go, hey, there's a bad cap, it's not, and oh yeah, well, you know what, we need to replace the thermal anyway. That's my thing. I know guys will tell you the thermal paste doesn't fail. Well, you know what, if you've got no problem with your PC, yeah, that's the case. But if you get one where the thermal paste does fail, typically I'm thinking these guys that are saying it doesn't fail, it's a 3 to 5 year old computer, but when you get one that's 13 years old, and it's the thermal paste fails, and you replace the thermal paste, and then it's fixed. How do you explain that? Because we've had that happen more than once. That's how I learned about replacing thermal paste. So the point is, we go through this process, then we find the band caps on this video. And I don't feel like I'm a fool because I know my gear. I know I had never replaced that thermal paste on that machine, and it needed to be done. It needed to be cleaned. So we went through that process, and then we discovered the bad caps. I had a note taped on the computer that I didn't read that said, if this thing goes down, check the capacitors. And to go on about that topic, guys will put them on eBay that they know that this value capacitor you need for this motherboard, which they sold a lot of them. So in order to make money, they will order a bunch of those capacitors, put them in a box at their house, and then sell each one, mark it up 10,000 times. So a 35-cent capacitor I'm used to paying, 50 cents, 35 cents per cap, will be like $5, which kind of sucks. But at the same turn of the screw, if I go to order that capacitor from an electronics supply house, I will quickly find they have a minimum order of $10 or $20, and then there's expensive shipping. So these guys on eBay, they're smart. They price it just below what you would pay if you went to one of the big boy suppliers and had to deal with their minimum order and the shipping. And hopefully by the time hopefully I'm not using a dual core AMD CPU based computer in the time it takes to install this motherboard and those other bad caps on there fail. Hopefully by that time I will have obtained somehow, because we don't buy, I bought a motherboard, I bought a chip, but usually we get stuff, we get other people's trash is what we get. And then we will replace the thermal paste or replace a capacitor, and that's our computers. So if you want to learn about that process, keep in mind the rest of this video is a half-hour long video. It's me running my mouth, giving you all the information I learned about fixing a computer that has this problem of shutting itself off. So if you're looking for a real quick video that's going to be like, number 1, take it apart. Number 2, clean all the dust out of it. Number 3, pull the chip. Number 4, clean the thermal paste off the chip. Number 5, replace the thermal paste. Number 6, put the chip back in. Number 7, turn it back on. There you go. But that's not what I do here. And I don't appreciate people getting snotty and getting angry with me, like a whole half-hour video to find out it's bad caps. Well, it doesn't matter to me. I'm going to replace the thermal paste because it never was done. And I've run into it where just replacing the thermal paste will completely fix the computer. So that's always kind of the first thing that I do when the thing just starts shutting itself off for no reason. And then you also, at that point, when you open it up, before you do anything, should visually inspect it and make sure that none of the capacitors are bulging. So with that, I'm going to give you the rest of the video. I hope you enjoy it, or don't watch it. I mean, like I said, we've got it running now. It ran for a good half hour, and then it locked up. Now it's running again for another 15 minutes. What are the temps like?
I don't have that.
She has a core temp software, which is free, and that's going to let her know how hot the thing is running, which she doesn't have that on.
41 and 43.
It's good. All right, you guys enjoy the video or not? Hey YouTube, PD2 Finger here. My wife was working with this computer here and it shut off. So she rebooted it. It just goop out of nowhere, shut down. She had been on for about a half hour, maybe, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and it shut itself off. So out of the blue, computer shutting down, she rebooted it. This computer takes about a minute and a half to go through its boot cycle. It booted up to the desktop. She went to move something and it shut off again. So she waited a little bit, 5 minutes, turned it back on, it boots up. She's in there emailing her friend, boom, it shuts down again. I said, well, don't panic. At this point, there's some things to consider, okay? And I'm going to just go ahead and say 9 times out of 10, this is heat. So there's something that's causing heat to build up inside this machine in certain places where there's a built-in safety on the system that it knows, hey, when this gets to 120 degrees, shut off rather than cook itself to death. So rather than taking it into, calling the Geek Squad or your nephew that charges you $100, you can fix this yourself, but you're going to need some tools. Thermal paste oftentimes is going to be the main culprit. And you can order that on eBay, or you can get it at any electronics repair, or like Fry's Electronics, or any place that sells computer parts will have thermal paste. And it's a little tube of this white goop. It's almost like glue, like Elmer's glue. It's a little thicker. It's like paste almost, but a little more viscous. And another good tool is compressed air, or you can use a straw to blow it, or a brush, a picky tool like a toothpick. So first thing you want to do is you open your computer chassis up. There'll be a couple screws back here, and you're going to look in here. If that's packed with dust, you're going to want to remove underneath this fan. So you take these screws off here, and this fan will pop off, and then you can clean that. That's the main chip. It's going to be down in here. Okay. Now I removed this clippy fan here. The blue was on the left. Also, there's a slot. You see that slot? That on the connector, that slot is going to let you know that the slot
matches up with the clip. But there's a little tongue and groove. So when you're pulling this out, you know, I mean, really, before we pull the CPU out, you're going to want to make sure that this isn't clogged with dust. You can also blow through your power supply. There's vents back here. If it has a separate video card, you're going to want to put your hands on that and feel it for heat. It should be hot. Also, is it real dusty? You know, there's a chance that while we're doing this repair today, since we've got it open and we're working on it, I always like to go ahead and pull the video card and we'll take a look. You can see it's a little bit dusty. Looking in here, is there a real lot of dust? So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to blow in this. Now, the thing about these, this assembly in here, this is bad. It's you can take this thing apart too. See these screws here? You take all of these off of here, and the whole thing comes apart, and there will be all of this comes off, this metal, and that's all a heat sink that's connected to this fan. And underneath this heat sink, where the heat sink touches to the top of the chips get hot, really hot. They apply this stuff called thermal compound, and it goes bad. It gets dry and it turns into like glue. It glues itself. So then you need to gently rock and pry the thing up. What you do, you use rubbing alcohol and a Q-tip, and you remove all of that caked on thermal paste. Make sure that it's spotless. And then at that point you apply just a tiny amount of the thermal paste at every point of contact, at every chip, and put it back together. And then it'll work like brand new. Now, the thermal paste it costs like $3 for a thermal paste kit or less. You can get it on eBay. Like I said, I want to show you in here, pulling this out. This is the main heat sink, this fan. Like I said, there shouldn't be any dust clumps in here. If these lines are packed full of dust, that might just be your problem. I've used this clip here. This is what holds this down, is this clamp that runs through here on both sides. And it clips on to this point here and this point here. So with one flip of this lever, you flip this over and it lifts that off of there. And then you're able to pop this straight up. Now, the chip came with it. Ideally, the chip is supposed to stay in the socket with this latch holding it in place. You can't lift that latch because this thing's in the way. But looking here, it says Foxconn 2007. Now it's 2020. So this thermal paste has had plenty of time to cook into a glue bond. And it needs to be removed. So we're gonna pop this thing off of here by gently prying it, nudging it, and getting it off. You really don't want to bend any of those pins. And then we're going to reinstall it. There's only one way that the chip goes back in, so you have to look. There's a golden triangle here, and on one of these corners you will see that triangle denoted. Here it is. It's right there. So the triangles have to match up for it to fit, because the pins and the holes are specific. Well, hey YouTube, so what I did, I went using a fresh razor blade. I lightly scraped the excess around the sides, and then I went under here and pushed, gave it a jab like that, and the CPU popped right off nicely. So you just want to be conscious and aware that you don't bend the CPU pin. Okay. So we put this, you can take a look here and see how the thermal paste has turned dry, and that's our culprit. That's why the PC is shutting itself down. there's nothing wrong with the there's nothing wrong with the video card, but I gotta consider, you know, they're from the same era, and does that mean that we're getting close to the same situation with the thermal paste that was installed on the video card? Probably. So while I got this computer apart, and I'm using just 70 or whatever, it's not really rubbing alcohol. Rubbing alcohol has mint in it or some type of fragrance. Kita always cries when we come in here and start doing this, because the he associates Mama in the kitchen with feeding time, and Mama is ignoring baby. Mama is solely focused on being a camera person right now. Chicky Beaton, come on, Chicky boy, be big boy. You can be hungry a little bit.
I fed him.
You don't want a fatty bellows.
He just wants
you
a
be like
belly
daddy.
rub. Look at him.
You be like daddy and have a fatty bellows. You want a belly rub? Oh, Chicky Beaton. So yeah, there is. I'm continuing to clean this stuff because every time I clean it, there's more debris, discoloration on my rag. The chip looks like it's clean. Let me give this a once more and see if I got any. Yeah, I still have some discoloration here. So we're going to continue. I know in my
That's what we use.
the kit that comes, you can buy a kit that comes with cleaning stuff. They give you this thermal remover and then surface purifier. So for the last step here, yes, Chicky Beaton, I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit of that thermal surface purifier. Is it rubbing alcohol in this bottle? I have to read and see what it is. Yes, baby. Yes, baby. Okay, so that's pretty good. You want to try to get a shot of that? They look pretty clean. And what we're going to do, like here is some thermal paste in, you can see I've used it already. We're going to apply a small amount of that. I got this stuff. This stuff was marked down, and it was really cheap at Micro Center. It comes in these little plastic baggies. This one's been used already. You just squeeze it out. So my kit for doing this job includes ArctiClean, the remover, which I just use alcohol, and then the surface purifier, which I just use alcohol. When I first started doing this, I was real cautious about using this, and then I kind of, after doing it so many times. So that's our CPU. Our CPU is prepped. We're going to set this aside and just make sure that it can't fall. If the CPU falls, you risk bending those pins, and that's what the worst possible thing that can happen on the CPU is dropping it and bending the pins. And by the CPU, that means the central processing unit or computer chip. This is the computer, Athlon 64X2. So we set that off to the side and brush this off a little bit. Now I've got, how does this come off of here? Oh boy. So my wife and I are no strangers to computer repairs. One of the fairly common things that we ran into a while back was failed capacitors. Capacitors failing on motherboards, and also capacitors failing on video cards. And the thing about these capacitors is I have here, we stock capacitors, resistors, transistors, integrated circuit chips, diodes, potentiometers, and more. but the parts that we have here are for our standard through hole parts, and the capacitors that are utilized on the video cards and a lot of the ones on the motherboards are low ESR capacitors. That means that you really should replace them with an appropriate low ESR capacitor, which I don't stock. Now, sometimes it seems like the low ESR ones on the motherboards, I don't think I've ever run into that. I've only run into that on the video cards, and it's always a low ESR cap that blows on the video cards. Although it seemed like this was a thing for a while, it was real popular, and then we didn't run into it. Like China stopped using janky capacitors. Okay, now it's loose. And there's also this connection for the fan, which, again, blue is on the left, and we have a black on the right. And I'm going to unplug the connector for the... You don't want to rip the wires out when you're doing this. And it's being stubborn, and I don't see my pokey tool. Oh, here's my pokey tool. This is a dentist pick tool. And sometimes these will be helpful getting in somewhere where your fingernail can't get. So now there's two other screws on the top that I didn't see, and I am going to try not to drop many of these screws. That one goes there. This one, okay. Are these the same? Well, maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I'm going to keep them separate either way. I'll try to remember. And there's one more. There's always one more screw. Okay, wasn't that exciting? Aren't you glad you tuned in today? So here's what we got. These here are thermal pads for the RAM chips, and we're going to reuse those. So what we want to do in here is I'm going to blow. One thing that I've read, you can see here the thermal paste on the CPU chip for the GPU. It's interesting to me when I think of a GPU, it's almost like it's another miniature computer that lives inside your computer. So I'm going to set this, set that off to the side. And I'm not so hot on this crazy angled bent toothbrush that I'm working with today, but what can I say? It looks like it's getting the job done. Reading online about protecting your computer from thermal disasters, keeping it cool. Keep it cool, Charlie, was what the Dred Zeppelin Elvis impersonator used to say on stage when Charlie, his roadie, would incessantly be handing him fresh towels. Keep it cool, Charlie. One of the things that I read, your tips and tricks as far as keeping it cool, Charlie, is do not set your PC on the ground, on carpet, or even the ground. If you can elevate it even
On a piece of wood.
Yeah, like cut a piece of plywood for it to sit on is better. And we tend to take our PC yearly and bring it in the kitchen and just take the top off, use compressed air to blow the dust out of it, and then also my wife will get in there with a pick tool.
An air compressor, not just a can.
Yeah, well, people don't have air compressors that live in apartments, you know. You can. What we were doing was throwing the computer in the back seat of the car, driving a couple blocks down to a gas station that had a for filling up tires, and I would stick my finger in my thumb in the valve and open it up and blow the air out of the PC using that. That's how we used to do it. But a can of compressed air will work. You can buy these little tools that plug in that they have a mini air compressor built in. This is just rubbing alcohol. So we're going to put the rubbing alcohol in the area where the old dried out heat compound. I almost said rubbing compound. And then go ahead on carefully on the chip. There's little surface mount parts in here, so it's... Is it wise to be delicate on these? Or can you just go Captain Caveman style? Whack-a-mole. Here I'm actually going to put quite a bit of and use a very light toothbrush. No, I'm going to get in here with the so it's nice and clean. I have this thermal surface purifier. If I'm looking at this NVIDIA chip, seeing kind of an unusual rainbow pattern of infection. We want this to be clean as we can get it. Ooh, look at that. It's clean. Maybe there is something to this surface cleaner. So I'll put a couple drops on here. Again, the thermal paste, they've got all kinds of stuff with silver, with zinc. And a guy did a video where he tried using like oatmeal, all toothpaste, and it was surprising how well. I think J.B. Well was the one that really worked very well, surprisingly. So here we have one that's already been opened. And ideally, you know, if you were gonna, like I bought this. This is not good, it's separated. I bought this compound on the reduced rack. Here I'm mixing it up because it seems to have separated, so I'm mixing it in the... And was that smart, saving a buck on my buying old, out of code? So yeah, that's actually enough. They tell you don't overdo it. So now I'm gonna kind of lean that. Some people will, you know, smooth it out. You're really not supposed to. So I'm gonna just Is this how this goes? Yeah. This is how this goes. There we go. Okay, we got the first screw in. I'm going to take a break here and put the rest of these screws in, and we'll see you in a minute when we're going to reinstall everything on the computer. So I guess she's filming, which I didn't want her to. I'm going to brush the dust off the back of this board, which, does that matter? Probably not.
I don't know how to hook up.
So here is the video card. We replaced the thermal compound in it and cleaned the channels because the...
Can you plug the fan back in?
I forgot to plug the fan back in. So there you go. We popped that in there, and then I had this screw hidden nice up here. I'm going to go ahead. I really don't want to drop this screw. This is where having a magnetic screwdriver is good, or if you don't want a magnetic screwdriver, you can take some dum-dum or blue tack and put that on the end of your screwdriver. Plug the power cable back in this. Your video card may not have that power cable, mine does. Now, the important part here is, you know what, I'm going to move this because it's, there's a triangle, there's a golden triangle here marked here, and then there's a golden triangle marked on this side, so that lets me know that for the chip install, and there, it dropped just in place.
I need to get that paste right.
I've got paste in here. Now there's a little dust. Dust on the rails, dust on the chip holder. Isn't that a song, John Cougar, Mellencamp? So, these guys I used to work with used to sing that. Blood on the Scarecrow. One of them had a farm, a hog farm. And they were like biker types, that really good guys. Okay, now that's a little bit much what came squeezing out of there, so we're gonna I'm actually gonna here's the square. And now we go with the challenging part. We'll plop this and oh boy, oh boy. There we go. It latched. And the blue goes on the left, because I remember looking at this, but also there's a tongue and groove. So, at this point, we are going to take a break. We're going to attach the power cables to the computer and reboot. And once it boots up, we will take a break. And then I'll shoot some more video in like a half hour or so when the computer's been running and we see that
It's still on.
my analysis of the the issue was correct, that the thermal paste was old and non-functional, and that was causing heat to build up at the point of the CPU, which is real bad. All right, see you in a minute. After we cut, I noticed some of the capacitors on the motherboard are bulged. Now, how you can tell this is a good eye, like if you need glasses, you need to put your glasses on, use a flashlight. There is a cross pattern cut on the top of the capacitor. That's part of its design. And that's made so if it does blow, that top part will bulge out. It makes it weaker, so you can just look and, oh, there's a bad cap, there's a bad cap. Now, one of the things that tipped me off was a note. There's a note on here, and it says, if the thing goes down, check the caps on the motherboard, which means we have replaced caps on this motherboard before. So it also says we may have a compatible motherboard, AM2K9N box. There's a box in with the computer stuff. There's a compatible motherboard. It's I got it from a friend. He never used it. He bought it for when Win XP or Win 7 came out and never used it. Anyway, my choices are at this point, you know, we're going to show you the bad caps so you can figure that out. That's always a possibility. And for me, I know if I haven't replaced thermal paste in a computer and it goes down, that's the first thing I do. Now, my error here was not looking at the capacitors, but the thermal paste was dry. So regardless, as a part of the process of elimination, really needed to take care of that. And it's not a big deal, trust me. Cleaning all that dust out of there, especially on that video card, and replacing the thermal paste. So I'm going to hand this over to the camera person who's going to do a close-up shot. Maybe you can see how these capacitors are bulged. And what we're going to do is plug the system in and see if we can get it running, see if it'll be stable now, you know, with adding this fresh paste. Maybe it'll run right at that threshold of being kind of hot, but not too hot. So we're going to install, well, actually I think we already have it in there. There's something called Core Temp that you can get from, I think it's ALCU. You get it from them. It's the first link that comes up. And that will install a lightweight application that doesn't have any spyware or malware. And all it does is tell you the temperatures and some other information. So if you're having a heat problem or you're having a problem and you're not sure and you want to know for sure, you know, you can install that Core Temp and that will tell you. That'll say the minimum temp, the maximum temp, and what it's running at, and you can watch it. And as you're watching it, you can go on the side, load up YouTube or whatever you was doing when it crashed and watch those numbers go up until it poops out. So pretty much what's going to happen here is we're going to throw everything back together and show you it booting up, see what happens. And she's going to use the computer scanning today. If it does continue to keep going down, we're going to take a look in our stash and see, do we have this other motherboard? Is it compatible? You know, and then it'll be swap that motherboard out into this thing, or we look physically at the capacitors. They're labeled. If we can't determine that, sometimes that's really hard to see at the angle that they're installed at. Like there'll be a buddy cap next to it covering the numbers. You can also type the number of the motherboard in and see if you can obtain that information somehow from looking at a diagram. But basically, these are just standard electrolytic capacitors. I very well may have them in stock, but they might be a little bit goofy on the... I might not have them. You know, I carry stuff it's not necessarily leaning towards computers. So I may very well have to go on to eBay. And then it would be, you know, the thing about eBay is, man, they know. They know that all the AMD boards have bad caps. So this weird value capacitor, we're going to charge you $5 to get two, plus $1.75 shipping. So to replace, you know, it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 capacitors, it could end up being something ridiculous, you know, like $40. to get those parts. And as far as that repair goes, you know, you completely remove everything out of you have to take the cards out. You have to disconnect every cable from the motherboard. You take the Phillips screws that hold the motherboard down, which there's like about between 8 and 10, 12 of those. And then you can leave the CPU and the cooler, the big block of aluminum and the fan on there. And you turn it upside down. You put some solder paste flux on there. Add some of your own 6040 solder and then pull. Or you can do it the right way and use a solder sucker to remove the solder, and then use Goot wick to remove the remnant, apply heat, and have your partner pull on it. And once you pull it out, you clean up the pads, make sure the holes are clear, sink the other through hole cap into there, trim the leads, slap some more paste flux on there, hit it with your 6040 Kester, and you're in business. So it's not really a big deal. And like I said, my wife and I have repaired video cards. I'm guessing 3 video cards we've done bad caps in, and at least 3 or 4 motherboards. So it's something to consider. I mean, like if you can afford to just run out and buy a new PC, that's fine. We like to try to keep our stuff going and keep it out of a landfill. And if it's like a Core Duo or quicker and it's good enough for us, for our surfing needs, emailing, we're not video editing on it, well, what more do you need, right? Are you that impatient? I mean, I've got a i7, and it's nice, but that's the one fast computer we have in this house. All the rest of them are dogs. But they're not Pentiums. They're not Celerons. The AMDs are, they are what they are. All right, you guys, we're going to see you in a minute. We're going to power this thing up, connect the scanner to it, see if it can run stable enough to scan some pictures. And then I'm going to grab all those photos by transferring them on a USB, or maybe we'll set up the network. Then I'm going to make a video on the i7. So, got some fun stuff ahead of us. See you in a minute. It's running at 44 out of a max of 49. So we'll have to see if it